Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
You know, usually when an organization invests millions, or in today's climate, literally billions of dollars into a new piece of technology, there's this expectation of just basic, undeniable math.
Right, a clear return.
Exactly. Like, think of a massive manufacturing plant buying a state-of-the-art assembly line robot. You plug it into the wall, you power it up, and suddenly it's producing, 10,000 widgets a day instead of the 1,000 you were getting yesterday.
The math is incredibly clean. It's visible. You can just point to it on a quarterly spreadsheet and say, there is our return on investment.
Right. It's a very comforting equation.
Oh, absolutely. Business leaders love that kind of straightforward input to output dynamic. It makes the massive capital expenditure completely justifiable to the board,
But then you look at what is actually happening right now with artificial intelligence across the corporate world, and suddenly that simple, comforting math is just completely broken.
Yeah, it really is.
We are looking at a landscape where the financial promises from tech giants are in the trillions, but the actual return on investment, like the verifiable on-the-ground ROI, is incredibly murky. So welcome back, Learn, to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission today is to really unpack this massive disconnect between the hype of AI and what organizations are actually experiencing, and to figure out why this is happening.
Yeah.
We aren't just looking at, glossy boardroom propaganda.
No, we really had to dig deeper for this one.
We did. We cross-referenced macroeconomic data from institutions like the National Bureau of Economic Research and the Conference Board with the actual gritty reality from worker surveys, tech forums like Slashdot, and independent developer blogs. We really want to see what happens when the top-down mandates actually hit the trenches.
Which is vital, honestly, because if you look exclusively at either the macroeconomic bird's eye view or just the individual worker's perspective in isolation, it paints an incomplete picture. You really need both to understand why the traditional gauges of productivity just aren't moving the way anyone predicted.
Well, to give you a sense of just how alarming this data is, let me start with a staggering statistic from the sources. According to a massive, newly released survey from the NBER, which polled 6,000 top executives across the U.S., the U.K., Germany, and Australia, nearly 90% of them stated that AI has had absolutely zero impact on productivity or employment at their companies.
Zero.
90%. That's huge.
It's wild. And this is despite the fact that roughly 70% of those exact same firms report that they are actively paying for and deploying AI tools right now.
Wow.
Yeah. They bought the expensive new machine, they plugged it in, and the widget count just hasn't budged an inch.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what is actually going on inside the C-suite? Clearly, there's a massive reality check happening right now.
There really is. If we pull the data from the Conference Board's C-suite outlook for 2025, the whiplash is quite severe. Just a year ago, expectations were absolutely sky high. Like, in 2024, 86% of CEOs expected AI to dramatically improve their company's productivity.
Right.
Fast forward 12 months to today, and only 44% claim they have actually seen any workforce productivity improve.
That's a massive drop.
It is. But the most revealing detail from the NBER survey isn't even about the company at large. It's about the leaders themselves. The average CEO surveyed only uses AI for about 1.5 hours a week.
Which, frankly, is less time than most people spend doom scrolling on their phones in a single afternoon.
Exactly. It highlights a profound disconnect. You have these leaders expecting a bottom-up revolution while barely interacting with the technology themselves.
Yeah, that's a huge problem.
And when they were asked to identify the biggest impediment to getting a return on their AI investment, 45% of these CEOs cited lack of expertise. Yeah. That reason outranked software integration issues, it outranked the quality of the AI's output, and it vastly outranked regulatory or data governance concerns.
Let's drill into that for a second, because when they say lack of expertise, I imagine a lot of people just assume they mean they don't have enough hardcore software engineers or computer scientists on the payroll to make it work.
Right. That is a really common misconception. But the research points somewhere else entirely. They aren't talking about lacking people who know how to code the foundational models.
Okay.
They are talking about a lack of management expertise, like leaders who actually know how to completely redesign a department's workflow around a neural network.
So it's an operational issue.
Exactly. What we are witnessing isn't a failure of the technology itself. It is a classic large-scale deployment failure.
That actually brings to mind an analogy from one of our on-the-ground sources. We read this fantastic blog post by an independent developer named Danny.
Oh yeah, the piano analogy.
Yes. He argued that the way companies are deploying AI right now, which is basically just buying an enterprise chatbot license for every employee, emailing them a login and hoping for the best,
Right.
is like buying everyone in the company a grand piano.
Right.
And then they act totally shocked when they don't have a company of world-class concert musicians a month later.
It perfectly illustrates the flaw in their strategy. I mean, they're distributing a complex tool and completely mistaking it for distributing a skill.
But wait, I'm stuck on something here. Haven't we seen this exact kind of panic before? Like, I'm thinking back to when personal computers first hit the office.
Yeah.
People were freaking out that typing on a screen wasn't making us instantly faster than, using a typewriter or writing by hand.
We have. History is repeating itself almost to the letter here. And it brings us to a phenomenon economists call the Solow paradox.
Okay, what is that?
So back in 1987, the Nobel laureate Robert Solow coined this famous phrase. He said, "You can see the computer age everywhere, but in the productivity statistics."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, during the 70s and 80s, computing capacity in the United States increased 100-fold. Everyone was getting a terminal on their desk. Yet, labor productivity growth actually slowed down during that era.
See, that math doesn't make sense to me. If you drop a computer on my desk in 1985, I can type out a document exponentially faster than I could draft it by hand, and I don't have to retype the whole page if I make a typo.
Right.
How on earth does that make the whole economy technically less efficient?
It comes down to what economists call the J-curve effect. And it requires understanding something called complementary capital investments.
Okay, break that down for me.
So when a truly disruptive general-purpose technology arrives, whether it's
Yeah.
the electric dynamo, the personal computer, or generative AI, you can't just drop it into an existing environment and expect magic.
Right.
Think about that 1980s office. You didn't just buy the computers. You had to physically rip open the walls to install networking cables.
Yep.
You had to physically train an entire workforce that had literally never used a mouse before. You had to invent entirely new management structures because information was suddenly flowing horizontally instead of just vertically.
So you basically had to completely reorganize the reality of the workflow.
Precisely. And reorganizing reality is incredibly expensive and time-consuming. It takes 2 to 5 years. In the case of the PC, it took decades.
Wow.
During that initial period of massive trial, error, and infrastructural spending, overall productivity actually drops. You are paying the massive cost of the new tech without reaping the streamlined benefits yet.
It dips down first.
Exactly. That forms the initial downward dip of the letter J on a graph. It takes years before the curve finally swings upward and pays off.
Okay, so those executives who are still projecting that AI will boost overall productivity by maybe 1.4% over the next 3 years might not be delusional. They're just trying to wait out the dip of the J-curve.
Right. They're playing the long game.
But that creates a fascinating tension. Learner, if you're listening right now, you might be asking the same question we asked. While we wait for this macroeconomic curve to go up, what exactly is happening in our offices today?
It's a great question.
If the C-suite is staring at flat productivity numbers, but our servers are working overtime generating endless streams of text and code, what exactly are these companies producing?
They are producing volume, but as the data clearly shows, volume is rapidly becoming a serious liability.
This is arguably the most frustrating part of this transition. We have essentially entered the era of workslop.
Workslop, yeah.
One of our sources, a piece from Startup Fortune, highlighted a leaked internal survey from a massive Fortune 500 tech company. After this company rolled out generative AI tools to their entire staff, the volume of their internal documentation, memos, and code output absolutely skyrocketed, like it tripled.
Right. And to a manager looking purely at a dashboard of activity metrics, that looks like an unbelievable return on investment. The machine is producing 3 times the widgets.
Except the workers themselves told a very different story. 68% of the employees surveyed reported a perceived decrease in the overall quality of their work.
Yeah, that's the catch.
Even worse, they reported a sharp increase in the number of hours they were forced to spend reviewing, debugging, and fixing AI-generated errors.
Because generative AI has drastically lowered the cost and effort of producing a first draft, but it fundamentally failed to lower the cost of producing a good draft.
Hold on, I have to push back here for a second. If you listen to the major tech industry earnings calls, You hear a completely different narrative.
Sure.
You have tech titans like Microsoft's Satya Nadella and Salesforce's Mark Benioff on the record boasting that their users are generating code up to 55% faster using their AI assistants.
Right.
That is a massive verifiable metric. Are you saying they're just making that up? I mean, doesn't that prove the ROI is real?
Well, they aren't making the metric up, but they are measuring the speed of generation, not the speed of completion. And this is the crux of why employees are feeling so burned out. Before AI, the hardest part of the job was generation. Staring at a blank page or a blank code editor and trying to manifest an idea from nothing.
Right, the blank page syndrome.
Exactly. Now, that generation is almost instantaneous, but the burden of labor hasn't disappeared. It has simply shifted from generation to curation.
That makes a lot of sense.
When an AI spits out a 35-page strategic proposal or 1,000 lines of code in 3 seconds, a human being with deep domain expertise still has to sit down, read every single line, verify the logic, and hunt down all the subtle hallucinations.
And as we all know from, fixing other people's mistakes, curation requires an intense cognitive load. It is exhausting. You're trading the creative effort of writing for the highly analytical effort of proofreading a machine that sounds incredibly confident, even when it's entirely wrong.
Totally. Think about what this actually looks like in practice. The 3 Trends report we reviewed discusses the fragmentation of work. Employees are using these tools for quick wins. An employee takes 3 bullet points of rough thoughts, feeds them into an AI, and instantly expands them into a beautifully formatted 5-page corporate memo.
Right.
And then they email it to a colleague.
And that colleague, who is already overwhelmed, receives a 5-page memo they absolutely do not have time to read. So what do? They feed it into their own AI assistant and ask it to summarize the 5 pages back down into 3 bullet points.
It is an absurd AI detour. The actual work hasn't moved forward at all.
No.
All we did was add layers of technological friction, compute costs, and signal loss at every single step of the communication chain.
It's just wild.
This dynamic is creating a flood of generic, low-quality content. It's exactly what users on forums like Reddit and Slashdot, which, is a long-running hub where veteran developers gather to talk shop, they're calling it workslop.
Workslop, it's such a visceral term.
It is. The systems are getting bogged down, making it impossible to find actual human-verified knowledge. Researchers and the sources even warned that the biggest hidden cost of this deployment might be interpersonal resentment.
Wow, resentment.
Yeah, because you are essentially forcing your coworkers to clean up the mess your AI generated.
I mean, think about your own inbox this morning.
Yeah.
How many lengthy emails did you receive that you strongly suspect were generated in 3 seconds, but will take you 10 minutes to actually decipher and verify?
Too many.
So if these generic top-down enterprise mandates are just creating a flood of work slop, and the macroeconomic data shows 0 overall movement, is anyone actually getting a real return on their AI investment right now?
They absolutely are. But to see it, you have to stop looking at corporate spreadsheets and start looking at highly customized individual workflows.
Okay, let's talk about the micro-level ROI. Because that independent developer we mentioned earlier, Danny, he wrote a brilliant piece arguing that the thousands of CEOs claiming AI has failed are simply looking in the wrong places. He says true ROI right now is granular, it's highly personal, and it's virtually invisible to an executive who's looking for a department-wide transformation.
Right. It doesn't show up as a 20% bump in corporate revenue. It shows up as the quiet elimination of a dozen tiny daily frictions for a single power user.
Let's break down exactly how this looks. So Danny describes using a tool called Granola, which just sits in the background of his meetings and transcribes the conversation.
Okay.
Then, using a custom plugin he built himself, he pipes those meeting summaries directly into his Obsidian Notes vault. And for those who aren't familiar, Obsidian is basically a highly customized digital notebook that links ideas together like a personal wiki.
It's a great tool.
It is. And because of this setup, Danny doesn't have to scramble to take notes, and he gets 20 minutes of his day back every single day.
That adds up fast.
And he also uses Claude to scaffold code for his side projects. And scaffolding, in development terms, is basically the digital equivalent of laying down the concrete foundation and putting up the wooden 2x4s of a house.
So he can skip the boring structural work.
Exactly. He gets straight to the custom carpentry.
Yeah.
It turns a whole weekend's worth of tinkering into an afternoon task.
What's fascinating here is the compound effect of these hyper-specific integrations. Saving 20 minutes on a meeting doesn't move the needle on a quarterly earnings report.
No, not at all.
Shipping a personal side project faster doesn't impact corporate productivity metrics. But when an individual worker systematically eliminates the focus tax across 10 different mundane tasks in a single day, their actual capacity for deep, meaningful work multiplies.
But here is the massive caveat. Danny only achieved those gains through months of individual trial, error, and coding.
Right.
He had to figure out exactly how these models fit into his highly specific, idiosyncratic way of thinking. His employer didn't map that out for him. Handing him a generic enterprise license didn't do that for him.
No.
The individuals who are actually getting a return on investment are the ones teaching themselves how to play the piano.
That autonomy is crucial, but it introduces an incredibly uncomfortable trade-off that we just cannot ignore. Danny admits in his writing that to achieve this magical level of personalized productivity, he has to feed his entire stream of consciousness into third-party AI models.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of data.
His meeting transcripts, his half-formed brainstorms, his proprietary code, his daily schedules. He actually notes the dark irony that he spent years trying to move away from big tech surveillance, going so far as to self-host his own private servers.
And now
He is willingly handing over more context to an AI in a single afternoon than a search engine ever collected passively.
for an individual, maybe that's a calculated choice.
Yeah.
You decide the time saved justifies handing over the keys to your digital life. But if you zoom out to the organizational level, you can't just have an entire global workforce feeding highly proprietary strategy documents, client data, and raw source code into a black box model that the company does not control.
It is an absolute nightmare for compliance, to be honest. And this isn't just a theoretical anxiety. If we look back at the C-suite Outlook data, 29% of chief marketing and communications officers who are currently leading AI adoption rates across the enterprise cite data privacy and security as their most massive hurdle.
That makes total sense.
Organizations want the granular ROI, but they are terrified of the data governance implications.
So we're sort of stuck in this terrible middle ground.
Yeah.
Top-down generic AI chatbots just create workslop and employee frustration. But the highly personalized, tightly integrated tools that actually provide real ROI require a level of context and data sharing that makes corporate compliance officers lose sleep.
Exactly.
How do companies bridge this gap? How do they start generating noise and start getting real organizational returns?
The 3 Trends report answers this directly, actually. Organizations have to fundamentally change the architecture of how work is done. They must stop retrofitting and start redesigning.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Right now, as we discussed with the J-curve, companies are treating AI the way they treated the early days of the internet.
Oh, so?
Well, back then, they took physical paper forms and just turned them into digital PDFs. They digitized the paper, but they didn't rethink the underlying process. Today, they are bolting generic, standalone chatbots onto legacy, pre-AI workflows.
Ah, I see.
They are asking employees to switch tabs, manually copy data from an email, paste it into a chat window, and ask the AI for help.
Which is the literal definition of the AI detour we talked about. It's a massive productivity killer because the AI has zero contextual awareness.
Right.
That chatbot doesn't know what you discussed in Slack yesterday. It can't see the client notes in Salesforce, and it certainly hasn't read the strategic deck you presented last quarter.
Exactly. We looked at a study from MIT's Nanda Center that was highlighted in the sources. It found that while 95% of organizations are getting zero tangible return from their AI pilots, the 5% that are succeeding share one defining architectural trait.
Which is?
They integrate AI deeply into the flow of work. Context is the only thing that makes the intelligence valuable.
So it's not about giving everyone a separate login to a magic text box. It's about embedding the intelligence directly into the systems we already live in.
Precisely. And the report emphasizes that this requires a massive shift in how we train people. We need to stop obsessing over prompt engineering and move toward goal engineering.
I love that distinction. Walk us through what goal engineering actually means.
Sure. So prompt engineering assumes the AI is a stupid machine, and you have to use the exact right magic words to trick it into giving you a good output.
Right.
Goal engineering assumes the AI already has all the context of your business. So instead of training employees to write a perfect 50-word prompt, you train them to define their intent, clearly state the desired outcome, and set the strict constraints.
Got it.
The AI does the heavy lifting because it is already connected to the organizational knowledge graph.
Paint the picture for us, learner. Like, what does this AI-native workflow actually look like when an organization finally gets it right?
The vision is ubiquitous, proactive AI. Think about tools that already do this on a micro scale, like Grammarly.
Oh, yeah.
You don't open a separate tab and prompt Grammarly. It just sits silently in your workflow, observing the context, and proactively offers improvements when it spots an issue.
Or look at Superhuman's email client.
A perfect example. Imagine waking up, opening your inbox, and every single email already has a highly accurate draft reply attached to it.
That sounds amazing.
And not a generic robotic reply, but one written in your exact tone, actively referencing the specific project files related to that sender, because the AI has secure access to your internal servers. You don't generate the draft, you simply review it, approve it, or tweak it.
It completely bridges the gap between abstraction and execution. I mean, the 3 Trends report points out that normally a project starts with endless brainstorming meetings, followed by abstract strategy documents, and you don't get real tangible feedback until an engineer finally builds a prototype 3 weeks later.
Right.
But with embedded context-aware AI, a team can go from a whiteboarding session to a tangible generated prototype in minutes. The work goes from 0 to 80% instantly.
Which allows the human beings to focus all of their energy and cognitive load on the final 20%. The nuance, the judgment, the lived experience, and the creative differentiation that machines simply cannot replicate.
Yeah.
AI stops being a clumsy tool you have to babysit and becomes a proactive teammate you collaborate with. But getting there requires leaders to ask a very difficult fundamental question.
What's that?
If AI were a teammate from day one, what would this department actually look like? Which legacy steps would disappear entirely?
It is a complete paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And it requires tearing down the old way of doing things. Okay, let's bring this all together for you. The massive trillion-dollar ROI promised by the tech industry isn't a myth, and it isn't a lie. But right now, for most companies, it is trapped.
Very trapped.
It's trapped behind a wall of poor software integration, a massive lack of management expertise, and a daily flood of low-quality work slop. Until organizations stop bolting standalone chatbots onto pre-AI workflows and start completely redesigning their systems to give AI genuine context, they're basically just using the world's most powerful supercomputers to generate more noise.
And for your own personal workflow, the takeaway from the sources is clear. Do not wait for a top-down corporate miracle.
Seriously, don't.
The best ROI you can find today comes from looking at your own daily routine, identifying the specific repetitive frictions that drain your focus, and experimenting with these tools to eliminate them. The compounding effect of removing those tiny barriers is where the real magic is hiding right now.
But before we let you go, there is one final, slightly provocative thought we really want you to mull over. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about productivity metrics, time saved, and the ultimate gleaming goal of having AI act as a perfectly integrated, frictionless collaborator that takes us from 0 to 80% instantly.
It sounds like the ideal state of work, honestly.
It does. But think back to our opening idea. The desire for a clean, precise mathematical equation instead of a murky, messy reality. If we successfully eliminate all the friction, all the terrible first drafts, all the agonizing over blank pages, all the late-night trial and error, if we remove the entire messy middle of the creative process, do we risk losing the very friction that actually sparks human ingenuity and out-of-the-box thinking in the first place?
It's a great point. If the machine is always there to proactively give us the answers, do we eventually forget how to ask the hard questions?
Something to think about the next time an AI assistant politely offers to finish your sentence. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.